Hi guys, welcome back to Comics Share Corner. My name is Rhett, and boy do I have a doozy for you today. You know, this Batman run is considered to be polarizing by a lot of different people. I've heard from people that absolutely love this one and people that absolutely hate this one. And I think that says a lot about the writer and how dedicated his fan base is, along with his detractors. Because this guy seems to have people who love or hate him as well. And what am I talking about exactly? Batman by Chip Zdarsky. Specifically his Volume 1 Omnibus. Volume 2, I don't know when that's gonna come out, but Volume 1 was just released and I read through the whole thing in a couple days and I wanna talk about it. I first wanna specify that there are 3 different parts to this omnibus. The first third is his Batman Urban Legends issue 1 through 6 story that features Batman in the Red Hood trying to take down a guy named Cheer and Mr. Freeze. The second part includes his miniseries called Batman the Knight, which kind of chronicles Bruce Wayne's journey. And then we get into his proper Batman run, which started with 125 and then went to 157. It was originally going to be cut off a little bit before that, but DC asked him to come back to write an arc because Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb are working on Hush 2. And as of this video's publishing, it has not fully been released yet, and we don't know when the last issue is coming out. So really great having Chip back for a couple issues, right? I first want to start off this discussion by telling y'all that I think Zdarsky is a really, really good voice for Batman and Bruce Wayne. He writes him very well, and whenever you are hearing Bruce's inner monologue, you really relate to this guy, and this is something that not a lot of writers can do well, so I very much commend Zdarsky on giving Bruce a very good inner voice, a very relatable inner voice. And I'm going to split this up into 3 parts. I'm going to talk about Urban Legends, I'm going to talk about The Knight, and then I'm going to talk about his Batman run proper. So we're going to get started with Urban Legends. This arc, I think, is a really, really good start to this omnibus. Even though it doesn't have anything to do with the larger Batman story he's trying to tell, really does have a good grasp on the relationship between Batman and the Red Hood. And there's a lot of really good callbacks and attention to continuity on Zdarsky's part. That's kind of throughout this entire omnibus, really. Zdarsky seems really interested in keeping with continuity and really trying to tie things to earlier events, so I commend him for that. And the dialogue between Red Hood and Batman is very plausible and very on point with how their relationship has been portrayed since the Red Hood came back in the Under the Red Hood story. They still feel like there is animosity between them, but Jason has started to forgive and forget more so, and Bruce is starting to forgive himself. I don't know exactly when this is supposed to take place, but it doesn't feel that long after Red Hood had already started. And the plot really seems like an excuse just to get Batman and the Red Hood together to solve a crime. So I'll kind of talk about kind of the main villain a little bit. His name is Cheer. He is the husband of one of the associates that helped develop the fear toxin by Scarecrow. And what he's trying to do is weaponize this toxin to basically put people into a delirious state permanently. And he ends up doing that with Batman, but the Red Hood is able to rescue him out. And instead of playing on people's fears, it's playing on people's dreams, which I think is really interesting. And it shows Batman having a happy life. It shows Jason, you know, reuniting with his mother and not having ever been killed in the first place, kind of showing him as a family man, that kind of thing. I think that's an interesting twist, along with Mr. Freeze kind of being under this toxin and the idea of him protecting his wife alongside, you know, her just never really being in this state to begin with. I don't know, I think this Urban Legends run is just a fun start to this omnibus. I don't know if I would have seeked it out if it hadn't been in this omnibus, but I'm glad I was able to read it. So that's something that I would recommend on its own if you can find a trade paperback of it. And if you want the omnibus, it's a great first start. Moving on to Batman the Knight. It's a fun story overall, and I think it has a lot of good aspects to it, but I can't help but feel that it is a little bit derivative, especially if you kind of have an idea of Batman's origin story already, along with having seen Batman Begins. This feels derivative of that more than anything else, if I'm being honest with you. I would much rather watch the first act of Batman Begins than read this 10-issue miniseries again. Not to say that there isn't anything worthwhile in it. I just think it's a lot more cohesive and a lot more focused than this miniseries tends to be. There are some great character moments. There's a great relationship between Bruce Wayne and this guy named Anton, who ends up being Ghostmaker. Seeing them kind of play out and seeing their differences and philosophies on how to deal with crime, I think is interesting. And I think it brings a dynamic to Bruce's life throughout this story that is really needed. He crosses paths with multiple different people that are going to know him well in the future, such as Ra's al Ghul, Zatanna. Really learning about Bruce's heart and where he stands with people even after all of the tragedies he's been through, I think is great. That's probably the biggest plus I can give this story, is that Zdarsky really writes Bruce with a lot of heart. And he does that throughout this entire omnibus, which I think there's a stereotype that Batman is kind of a cold, heartless person that doesn't care about others and the consequences that he does other than his no-kill rule. So being able to see throughout this entire book him write Bruce Wayne to be a really thoughtful and caring person is really nice. And if I had to pick a favorite issue out of this miniseries, I would probably say that the Zatanna one is my favorite. I think it's just a fun ride from start to finish. I really love Bruce and Zatanna's dynamic together. And it's a shame they've not been portrayed as a couple that much throughout DC canon, because I think they would make a great couple. And seeing them kind of on the younger side brings out a lot more passion in their love for each other. You know, they've been childhood friends in this miniseries, and Bruce knows Zatanna's father very well. They're very well acquainted. So just seeing that play out was really fun overall. I'm going to be honest with you. I would recommend not skipping the night if you're reading this omnibus, but I don't know if I would go out of my way to read it again. It's definitely worth a read, I would say, but not worth revisiting multiple times, because I think other sources have done Batman's origin story better than this one. And a lot of the information that you gather from this story seems derivative and kind of not as evenly paced as the others. If you really want my favorite version of the origin story, I would probably either say Year One or Batman Begins. Now we're into the proper Batman run. Now this is where a lot of the polarizing stuff really starts, but the proper Batman run in this book is not long. It's only from issue 125 to 136. And I think within those issues, Zdarsky has a really strong start and a really fun but sort of fan servicey multiverse story that feels tired, because the multiverse just feels tired at the moment. I think that the main villain of the first arc, Failsafe, I think that's a fun addition to Batman's canon, and I'll kind of explain Failsafe's origin story. Failsafe was developed by Bruce Wayne to kind of act as a failsafe in case he decides to go mad. It actually calls back Justice League Tower of Babel, where Batman's contingency plans for the Justice League was discovered by Ra's al Ghul. And there's kind of an interesting flashback scene between Batman and Superman where he's talking about, yes, I have a failsafe, but I can't tell anyone about it because it's meant to only stop me and nobody else. So I think that connection to continuity is really fun. And I've always been a big fan of JLA Tower of Babel. If you have not read Tower of Babel, go and check it out for yourself. It's such a good read. And then it kind of goes into the fact that in order for Batman to stop Failsafe, he has to go into his mind and bring out Batman Zur-En-Arrh. If you don't know, was kind of a Silver Age creation that was brought back by Grant Morrison and morphed into something completely different from what he was originally supposed to be. And I always like it when writers do stuff like that. You know, they go back into the canon and bring something that was considered maybe campy or dumb to the mass audiences now and kind of put a unique twist on it. For anybody who doesn't know Zur-En-Arrh, I would recommend doing some previous reading, checking out Grant Morrison's run, or at least doing some baseline research on what the character is to kind of get an idea of what he is before you read this. Because if you have no idea who Batman Zur-En-Arrh is, you are going to be extremely confused throughout his Batman run. The failsafe story is kind of brutal, and it's kind of that stereotypical Gotham is being held hostage takeover that you've seen in No Man's Land and other Batman stories like The Cult. I still think overall Failsafe is a great little arc, and it really tests Batman's relationship that he has with other people, because everyone is being taken out by Failsafe. Failsafe is the entire failsafe for the Justice League, let alone Batman. That character and arc Definitely don't skip out on that one. I think anybody will have fun reading it, especially if you're a Batman fan or a continuity nut. So then we kind of get into the multiverse story Chip Zdarsky cooked up in the running to Batman's 900th issue. Like I said earlier, it's fun, if not derivative of other multiverse stories. I wouldn't rank this up there with one of the best that you'll ever read. Honestly, if you want the best multiverse story, watch Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. In my opinion, you're going to have a lot more fun with those. I can't help but say that it's really fun as a Batman fan to see him interact with all of these different versions of Batman that have existed throughout time and media. You know, he sees Batman Beyond, he sees Batman the Animated Series, Batman Arkham, Kingdom Come Batman, the Injustice Batman. You know, I love DC and I love all these different versions, so I can't help but smile a little bit whenever I see it. I will say the explanation for the multiverse is kind of half-hearted. You know, if you just want to tell a story about a multiverse, you don't have to make it some kind of convoluted thing and try to explain it in some kind of scientific term. Just say, oh, a portal opened and then I was transported into the multiverse. You know, it's fan service. That's what this is. And there's nothing wrong with that, but trying to not be blatant about it, I think I'm not a big fan of that approach. And that multiversal energy thing that they had going on, I don't care about that. I just want to see him interact with other Batmen throughout the multiverse. That's it. And the villain, you know, having him be, spoilers, the villain being a sane version of Joker and having him basically create Jokers throughout the multiverse, I think is underwhelming. I don't really care about that, to be honest with you. And I think this is cluing the audience into what will be Joker Year One, which I have not read, so I cannot comment on it, but it seems to be very well hated amongst all Batman fans. So if I ever do get around to reading it at some point, I will let y'all know how I feel about it, because it is polarizing and hated by a very large minority. So take that for what you will. But I think that overall, his Batman run proper gets off to a pretty great start with Failsafe and sort of continues going well overall with the multiverse arc. And I know, like I said earlier, I know a lot of the polarizing things will happen in what will be a second omnibus. So reading this first one, you're kind of left with a nice taste in your mouth. That's why I have to give it a recommendation, because it's a fun read. I didn't want to stop reading it, I won't lie to y'all. And being able to get through it in such a fast way, an omnibus usually has to be pretty special for me to read it within a week, let's say. I've read different omnibus editions over the course of months, sometimes years. I go back and forth. Not to say that they're bad, but sometimes the story content could be heavy, or, you know, I lose track of time. But Batman by Chip Zdarsky in this first omnibus format is really fun. And I really recommend it to anybody who's interested, especially if you can get it for below cover price, because I don't see this one going on sale. You know, Batman always sells well, so they're always going to keep it in print and have it for people that really want to read it. And this is the most modern Batman that you can get in print. So if you want to see the most current edition of Batman on your shelf, you're going to have to get the Chip Zdarsky run. All right, guys. I'm glad you stuck around. I hope you enjoyed watching and enjoyed hearing my thoughts on Batman by Chip Zdarsky Volume 1. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow me on different social medias. I have a TikTok and an Instagram. It's the same handle, Comics Chair Corner. And I'm glad y'all were able to join me again. Have a good one, y'all.